All right, so we're going to go over just two sections and notes today. We're going to do chapter 21, section 1 and 2 of notes. I know this is going to be a little bit different from what we're used to. Of course, it is. We're not going to be obviously in front of you, but it's going to be the same notes that I would give you if I was in front of you. Chapter 21 starts a new unit, as I talked about yesterday. We're going to do, it's called Southwest Asia. We call it the Middle East. Your book calls it Southwest Asia. So if I refer to it as Middle East or Southwest Asia, I'm talking about the same thing. So that's chapter 21. We know that when we do chapter 21, or when we start a new unit, we always talk about the physical geography first. Physical geography is broken down those three sections. The first being landforms and resources, second being climate and vegetation, and third being human environment interaction. So we'll talk about landforms and resources and climate and vegetation today. And then we will talk about human environment interaction on Friday. So this is just a couple pictures of Southwest Asia. This would be kind of a nighttime map. Somebody just came in the door. That's cool. This would be a nighttime map. You can see where there's heavily populated areas and where there's not very heavily populated areas, like here. Over here, like that's Israel, and next to some of these waterways in the Persian Gulf, there's a lot of people visible. You can see by the lights from cities, but you can see how it's mostly kind of empty here. You got just a map, a political map of the Middle East here that tells you the countries we're going through: Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman. The UAE is right in here. And Kuwait, and then the bigger countries. Some of you might have heard of, like Israel, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Lebanon, even maybe you've heard of. And then here's a physical map. We're going to look at another physical map here in a second. So this physical map, if you tell from it, this is just showing you the elevation of the Middle East and Southwest Asia. And you can see here that a lot of Southwest Asia, especially up here close to Turkey on down to Iran, parts of Iraq and Afghanistan, you have the higher mountain ranges of around 13,000 feet, an elevation in some parts over here, the high parts in eastern Afghanistan. And then you've got some moderate ranges here. That would be close to probably 1,600 to 6,500 feet. And then here you can kind of see, closer you get to the water, obviously the more it's going to get to sea level, because that's getting closer to the seas there. But you can see our physical map there. So some mountain ranges, some flat ranges here, some coastal ranges. Now here's just some pictures, so you can get your ideas on some of the things that you might have seen before, some of the places. This is Turkey. Turkey's up there by the Mediterranean Sea. It's at the very top up here. You can see here's Turkey. This is what it looks like here. Just their flag, some buildings there. Turkey's been a pretty big influence in world history. We'll talk about next week. Then here's Syria. Syria is right underneath Turkey. It's got some obviously drier climate. You can see it has some biblical towns in here, some mosques. There's some pictures there. Then you've got Lebanon. Lebanon's been in the news a lot with Turkey these past couple, in Syria these past couple years, just with the fighting going on in there, and ISIS. Beirut's in there. You can see here's Israel. Israel's right there on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. We've kind of talked about it a little. Israel's got a long storied history we'll talk about. Dead Sea's there. Dome of the Rock is there. Jordan. Jordan's right there next to Israel, on the eastern side of Israel. Jordan's been in the news a lot too. Petra is one of the seven wonders of the world, kind of this kingdom built into the rocks. If you've seen Indiana Jones, one of the Indiana Jones movies, it's there. I think The Last Crusade. Then Iraq, been in the news a lot since before you were born. War in Iraq and Saddam Hussein, post 9/11 stuff. Saudi Arabia is famous for where Mecca is. It's got some other things in there to talk about. You have, here's Iran. Iran's pretty mountainous. Iran has also been in the news a lot since before you were born with September 11th and us fighting a war in Iran. We'll keep going here. You've got Yemen. Yemen's really, really poor, poor country. Oman's not as poor as Yemen, as you can tell. Got McDonald's there, some palace. It says Sultan's Palace. It's behind a couple things. Then you have the UAE, very rich, and we'll talk about why. And Qatar is there next to the UAE. Kuwait is also next to them. Kuwait's been popular because of oil. All right, so let's talk very quickly just about a couple things here. Some of these peninsulas, big thing here in all of the Southwest Asian region. There's two pretty big peninsulas here. One is the Arabian Peninsula, you can see here. Obviously, this is a peninsula. It's got water on three sides. You got the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Arabian Sea underneath it. This is kind of the one that sticks out if you look at this region. This is pulling apart from Africa. We talked about this being like it's Great Rift Valley, but it's also been filled in with water here. And so you have this Arabian Peninsula here. Then you have the Anatolian Peninsula up here next to Turkey. Or I guess it is Turkey. You got the Black Sea here. You've got a little bit of waterway here. And then you have the Mediterranean Sea here. That's called the Anatolian Peninsula. It used to be called Anatolia. Now it's called Turkey. And then you have these things around here, and we'll show you some examples on in a second. You have straits, which are these narrow bodies of water that connect two larger bodies of water. One being there's a canal right here. A canal is man-made. It can be a strait, and it's right here, the Suez Canal. There's another one here. Right here's another strait. We'll talk about the Strait of Hormuz. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. The Suez Canal. So Suez Canal was this man-made thing. It's very large. It's this artificial waterway that connects the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. And they built it because they didn't want to travel all around Africa, the bottom part of Africa, to get to the Mediterranean Sea when it's that close. So they just built this man-made canal here that connects this waterway. Very important waterway, obviously, because all the trade that goes through here, because it connects these two when it wasn't usually connected. You can see here, here's the Red Sea is connected to the Mediterranean. Why do they call it the Red Sea? Well, the Red Sea, a lot of the area around it is dry desert, and it has this reddish rock tint. It's not because the sea's red, but it kind of gives the sea this reddish tint next to the rock. You can see it's very dry around the Red Sea. Most of the areas, the Red Sea is famous for the biblical story of Moses going across the Red Sea in the book of Exodus. You can see here, that's the Suez Canal we're talking about. It doesn't even show up on this map because it's man-made, but it's right here. We'll link these two together. And the Suez Canal is not small. Sometimes when we think of canals, we think that they're pretty small. You can see, obviously, that's a aircraft destroyer ship. If you've ever seen one of those in real life, you know how large those things are. And it can fit very comfortably inside this canal here. And you can see there's a port around it, a lot of cities around the Suez Canal. We already talked about the Arabian Peninsula just a little bit, but it is very dry, very sandy, and very windy. You can see here from this photo, not much green going on there. It's very dry. It's kind of an extension of that Sahara Desert right here. And if this is Africa. If you can continue this out, this is the Sahara Desert right next to it. So you can kind of see it's very dry. They have these wadis that are riverbeds that are dry all year round except for during the rainy season. Sometimes they can go 10 years without rain in this place, and then it'll rain, and these things right here will fill up with water for a little while, like a flash flood almost, and then it would go just as dry. So that's what a wadi is. Water, because it's so dry in this region, when we talk about resources here, water is one of the most important resources. It's not the one that makes them the most money, but obviously the most amount of people are going to live next to waterways because water is very scarce. And so when it's not very widely available, people are going to flock to where it is because you need water to live. Obviously, when we talk about the basic needs of society to live, people are going to settle where it's a good climate and next to water. And this is proven here. The Tigris and Euphrates river valleys have been support a lot of ancient civilizations. Some of the first civilizations in the world, if you believe what the Bible says, the Garden of Eden talks about the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers run through the Garden of Eden. So, Bible story would say that the Garden of Eden probably was somewhere here in modern day Iraq. So, if you believe what the Bible says, then I mean, there's been people here from beginning of time. But even if you don't believe that, ancient Mesopotamia, that's where this was. This is what Mesopotamia was. It means Mesopotamia translates to between the two rivers, and we'll talk about that next week. But that's where this is, between these two rivers. Okay, so the Tigris and the Euphrates has been inhabited for almost throughout the entire history of the world when people have lived in it. So which one is which? The Tigris is on the right. Tigris right. You can see around the Tigris, very fertile land. It's not that dry desert type here. It's got mountains. It's very fertile, very green. The Euphrates on the left here. Euphrates, same story. Very fertile and green around it. A lot of farming goes on along this place. Okay, and then you have the Jordan River. The Jordan River is this river that kind of makes a natural boundary between Israel on the left and Jordan on the right. And this Jordan River is all throughout biblical history as well, but it flows right here all the way down into the Dead Sea. And this is called the Dead Sea down here. We'll talk about why in a little bit. But this is the Jordan River. It flows right here. It kind of makes this natural boundary, kind of like what the Red River does between us and Oklahoma, or the Rio Grande River does between us and Mexico. So here you go here. Here's the Jordan River, and then it flows down in there to the Dead Sea. The Jordan River, at its most points, is not a very large river. You can see it's kind of, some places, very narrow to get across. So Jordan River, and then it flows, like I said, into the Dead Sea. So here's the Jordan River, flows into the Dead Sea here. Oops, clicked in my picture, went away. The Dead Sea is this landlocked lake. It used to be connected, but then mountains pushed this region up, and it has now salt water inside of here. And so that's why they call it a sea, even though it's not connected to a larger body of water. It's a landlocked salt lake, a lot like we talked about the Caspian Sea / lake, or even Salt Lake City in Utah has a salt lake there. You can see this region. This is very salty. It's only thing that can live in it is bacteria, so that's why it's called the Dead Sea, because fish can't survive in it. Only thing that lives in it is very hardy bacteria. It is the lowest place on the exposed surface of the earth. It's 1,300 feet below sea level. So the lowest you can go on the surface of the earth is here. It's called the Dead Sea. You can see people can float in it. You don't have to wear a life jacket in this. I mean, it's impossible to sink. It's very buoyant because salt water is buoyant more than fresh water, and this is the saltiest water on earth, and so you've got this buoyancy that you can have. So people go there just to float on the Dead Sea. There it is right there on the end of the Jordan River. That's the Dead Sea. And then the thing that makes them the most money in this place is oil. Oil is the major money maker. You can see oil reserves in the world. The Middle East has by far the most oil in the rest of the world. The United States is here, Venezuela, some other countries, Africa. But you can see here Middle East has a lot of oil reserves. So especially right here around the Persian Gulf is where you find the majority of the oil here in the Middle East / Southwest Asia. They get money there. Money, that's what makes the United Arab Emirates and specifically Dubai so very rich, is because of the oil that flows in this region. And so oil is it's the most prominent resource. It's what they have the most of, because the climate's so bad they don't have a lot of other resources. It's also the one that makes them a lot of money. Water's still more valuable because you need it to live, but the thing that makes them a lot of money is oil. So you can see here, like I said, not a lot going on here, but oil, especially around the Persian Gulf here. You do have some coal and some other hydroelectricity here and some other things, but the big resource that makes them a lot of money here is oil. That's why I said that Yemen is so poor, because look, no oil. but Oman's a little bit richer because they have oil. And these countries for sure are rich because they have oil. So the Persian Gulf is an oil-rich region. The Strait of Hormuz is this narrow strip of water where they ship the oil out to the rest of the world. So you can see here, this is the Persian Gulf, and this is the Strait of Hormuz. So this is right where the United Arab Emirates is, and that's what makes them so rich, is that they control this Strait of Hormuz. They control how much oil is getting in and out of the region, and so makes them very rich. You can see right here. It's called the Strait of Hormuz right here. Okay, and it leads to the Arabian Sea out there. The Arabian Seas, you can see, is the waterway out here. Okay, and then this is section 2, climate and vegetation. So when we talk about physical geography, the landforms, a lot of it's desert. It does have some mountainous terrains, as we saw out there, but you can see the largest to smallest climate would be desert. The desert climate is the largest, followed by semi-arid, Mediterranean climate, and then highland and humid subtropical, very small throughout here. I'll show you. This is some pictures. This is Israel. This is Mediterranean climate here. This is highland climate in Iran. I believe this is the humid subtropical here. That's in a very small part of Turkey. There's not much humid subtropical here. That's semi-arid in Syria, and this is desert in Saudi Arabia. You can see here, the big one here, desert. Biggest climate here is desert. Then you have semi-arid and Mediterranean next to waterways. Mediterranean next to waterways. Mediterranean next to waterways. Semi-arid is going to border deserts. So here's the desert here. The semi-arid is kind of bordering it. And then highland is over here where you have the highland climate. Okay, and so humid subtropical is very tiny. Like I said, not much humid subtropical here. Just the very top part of Turkey is humid subtropical. And so you have desert. In fact, they have the desert here. It's called the Rub al Khali. I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly, but it's known as the empty quarter. It's the size of Texas. You can fit Texas inside this desert. So it's a huge desert in Saudi Arabia. Surface temperatures can reach up to 150. They can go almost 10 years without rain. And this also translates to the place where no one comes out. So not many people live there. It's very almost uninhabited because it's so dry, so hot. It's just, there's nothing that can grow there. It's hard to do life there. And so there's deserts here. There's deserts up here. I showed you there's some deserts up here, and then small desert out here. Then you have salt deserts. These salt deserts are in eastern Iran. That would be this one right here. These are called the Dashti Lut and the Dashti Kavir. They're in eastern Iran, and then these salt deserts are caused by lack of rain, and then so this wind makes it evaporate the soil, and then the soil leaves behind this chemicals and salt, and so it's very hot. Almost uninhabited. They have stuff like quicksandish type stuff here. It's kind of marshy, salt marshy in some regions, and so it's very dry. Like I said, not many people live here, so it's very dry and uninhabited there. You do have some regions that people do live, like semi-arid. You can see the semi-arid here, semi-arid climate here in the middle of Turkey. Also a lot in parts of Iran and Afghanistan. You have the semi-arid climate. Semi-arid means it gets a little bit more rain. It has usually some rain, maybe a rainy season, but it's still pretty dry. You need things that can grow there. Not all crops can grow in that little amount of rain. So you have some grasslands like steppes, grasslands, but the crop that grows there a whole lot is wheat and barley. Are grown in Syria and Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. And it's also good for grazing. Turkey has some goats, I believe, what your book said. They use the goat hair for stuff, but a lot of goat grazing in Turkey, apparently. And then Mediterranean is where a lot of the people live. It's next to the waterways, like the Mediterranean Sea. Obviously, there you can see here Mediterranean climate next to the Mediterranean Sea. It has hot, dry summers, cool, wet winters. You can see right here around the Tigris and the Euphrates, because it's next to waterways. You have that Mediterranean climate. So that's really good for farming. You can farm year-round with this climate. It's Tigris and Euphrates in Iraq, Turkey, and the Mediterranean, and it's good farming. So a lot of high population densities. There's been people, like I said, that lived around these regions for a while because the climate is so good. People can farm year-round when they next to waterways, good climate next to water. And then here's a vegetation map. Obviously, here we have deserts. Not much can grow there. Okay, you have desert and desert waste. Here you have some little grasslands here in Turkey and parts of Syria and Iraq. Then you have some right here where you get up the most amount of water, like the Tigris and Euphrates, parts of Turkey, Lebanon. You're going to have some mixed forest, and then highland climate. Like I said, it varies. We talk about highland climate means as the elevation changes, the climate changes, and so you can have different climate there. But here's the Mediterranean scrub, which just means shrubs. Some trees, a lot of shrubs and bushes can be there. And that is now section 3, so we'll wait to do that till tomorrow. This is your notes. I'm going to post these notes on Google Classroom like I always do, so I'll post these for you on your Google Classroom. If you have any questions, you can log on to your Google Hangouts and talk to me face-to-face tomorrow. You can post questions on Google Classroom. I'm going to post a quiz that goes along with this. All the answers can be found here in your notes, but also the answers can be found in your book. I've showed you how to get on. If you don't know how to get onto your book, your online textbook, there is a video, 2 videos underneath this one that will show you how to log on to that. So if you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully this wasn't too weird for you and too long. Just let me know if I can do anything for you. Thanks.